The silk of my black funeral dress still whispered as I walked past my daughter-in-law's smirk, her laughter light, cruel, and meant to humiliate. Still, I didn't stop. I adjusted my brooch. Charles's cufflink turned gold, and let her pretend I hadn't noticed. As the scent of lilies thickened, her whisper reached someone behind me. She really wore that? The same woman who married my son tried to bury me in mockery before grief had settled. That's when I knew. She saw the dress as a costume, not armor. So I wore gold to the will reading, and let legacy write the final line. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The church bells tolled slow and deliberate, their sound crawling through the damp savanna air like a final breath refusing to leave. Beneath the swaying canopy of moss-draped oaks, Evelyn Hartman stepped out of the black sedan with the kind of quiet dignity that made people instinctively lower their voices. Her black silk dress shimmered faintly in the gray morning light, her pearl necklace catching just enough reflection to whisper of restraint, not wealth. Inside the chapel, whispers rippled through rows of designer hats and polished shoes. The scent of lilies was thick, cloying, too sweet for death. Evelyn's gloved hands trembled only once as she adjusted her handbag. Then she saw it. The tilt of Melissa's head, the glint of amusement on those lipsticked lips. Melissa leaned toward a friend in the front pew, her tone sugar-coated but slicing all the same. I guess no one told her we aren't in the 1960s. Evelyn didn't need to hear every word. She saw it in the friend's stifled grin. Her heartbeat stayed steady, but her throat burned. Across the aisle, her son Ryan scrolled through his phone, pretending not to notice anything, least of all his wife's cruelty. The glow of the screen washed over his face like cowardice given light. Evelyn sat down slowly, the silk of her dress whispering against the pew. She clasped her hands together, tight enough that the knuckles paled. Claire, sitting just behind her, noticed. The girl's brow furrowed, lips parting as if to say something, but she didn't. 16, and already learning the cost of silence. The service began. The minister's voice was warm, careful, practiced for grief. He spoke of Charles Hartman's generosity, his steadfast marriage, his legacy in the community. Each word was a brick laid neatly over Evelyn's composure. She stared at the casket, polished walnut, perfect, cold, and felt every gaze measuring her, waiting for tears that refused to fall. Halfway through the eulogy, Melissa dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that stayed suspiciously dry. When the choir began "Abide with Me," she pulled out her phone and angled it discreetly toward the stained glass. A filtered story would follow before sunset, Evelyn knew. Grief, but make it aesthetic. Lois Carpenter, seated at the end of the pew, shifted slightly and placed her wrinkled hand over Evelyn's. The old friend's touch was grounding. No pity, just solidarity. She won't smile long, Lois murmured, her voice low enough that only Evelyn could hear. Evelyn allowed herself the smallest exhale. No, she said, eyes fixed forward. Not long at all. When the service ended, mourners filed out to the cemetery behind the church. The ground was slick from morning rain. Evelyn's heels sank slightly into the earth as she walked, her steps measured, deliberate. The black veil brushed against her cheek, the scent of damp moss filling her lungs. She watched as the casket descended, a quiet, mechanical sigh cutting through the sobs and murmurs. Melissa stood beside Ryan, her umbrella tilted just enough to keep herself dry while a raindrop slid down Evelyn's sleeve. She whispered something to him, lips curling faintly. Ryan didn't answer. Evelyn caught his profile, a man hollowed out by years of compromise. Claire lingered near her grandmother, her hands clenched in her coat pockets. He would have liked the service, she said softly. Evelyn nodded. He would have hated the lilies. That was the only time she smiled that morning. When the final prayer faded, Melissa's voice floated above the drizzle, bright and brittle. Let's all remember Dad with love and good taste. She eyed Evelyn's pearls as if they were evidence of a crime. Evelyn turned toward her, face unreadable, posture unbending. Good taste, she echoed. Yes, that would be new for some. Melissa's smirk faltered, just for a second. It was enough. As the crowd dispersed toward their cars, Evelyn stood alone beside the closing grave, rain misting over her silk. Lois returned to her side, offering the umbrella Evelyn didn't take. You all right? She asked. I will be, Evelyn said. Her eyes were on the headstone, but her mind was already moving somewhere else, somewhere colder, more deliberate. She touched the pearls at her throat, each bead smooth and unyielding. The smirk from earlier still flickered behind her eyelids. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Lois, she said quietly, remind me to call Dean tomorrow. Lois blinked. The attorney? Yes. Evelyn's voice was steady, the rain beating on her gloves like mercury. It's time I made a few changes. The rain had cleared by morning, but Savannah still wore its damp perfume, a mix of wet brick, old magnolia, and the faint trace of salt from the river. Evelyn's car glided past the Spanish moss and shuttered mansions toward the heart of downtown, where law offices hid behind frosted glass and polite silence. Dean Palmer's building was one of them, tall, narrow, and severe. Inside, the marble floors reflected every step she took. The receptionist, a young woman in navy, looked up with the kind of respect people reserved for old money and older grudges. Mrs. Hartman, Mr. Palmer is expecting you. Evelyn nodded once. He usually is. Dean's office was a portrait of order, dark mahogany, no family photos, no stray papers. Only one living thing dared interrupt the sterility, a single orchid on the windowsill, perfectly white. Dean himself stood behind his desk, silver hair immaculate, suit pressed to geometry. Evelyn, he said, voice even as a ledger. You look well. She placed her gloves on the desk and sat. I'm not, but I'm ready. Dean folded his hands. Lois called me. She said you wanted to discuss revisions. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the stack of documents already waiting. Strike Melissa's name, she said. The words came out sharp, surgical. Every clause, every beneficiary note, every fallback provision. Dean didn't flinch, but a brow arched slightly. You're certain? That will be permanent. Evelyn met his gaze. She laughed at my mourning. Let her mourn what she never gets. He studied her for a long moment, the kind of silence lawyers use when gauging the weight of consequence. Then, a small nod. Understood. He reached for his pen, the scratch of ink steady, methodical. With each stroke, a chapter of Melissa's entitlement vanished from paper. Evelyn watched as the erasure unfolded, slow, clean, righteous. Who replaces her as co-executor? Dean asked. Lois, Evelyn said immediately. She knows me best, and she doesn't rattle. Dean's pen paused midair. Lois Carpenter? Yes. She's been with me since before Charles learned how to pronounce Chardonnay. That earned the faintest curl of Dean's mouth. Not a smile exactly, but acknowledgement. Very well. He jotted the name. And Claire? Evelyn said. Dean looked up. What about her? She moves up. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her posture perfect, unyielding. Charles would have wanted it. She still knows how to respect something without owning it. Dean's tone softened a fraction. She's 16. 17 soon, Evelyn corrected. Old enough to see what greed looks like. Dean flipped to another section of the file. We can amend her portion. Place the cottage under trust. Designate her as beneficiary of the scholarship foundation you mentioned years ago. I assume that's what you want? Evelyn traced a fingertip along the desk's polished edge. Yes. I want her to build something with her name on it, not mine. He made the final notation, signing with that elegant looping script of his. The air in the office shifted, cleaner, sharper, as if the ink itself had exorcised something ugly. When Dean closed the folder, he said, "This is a decisive document, Evelyn. There won't be an undoing once it's filed. Are you prepared for the reaction?" Evelyn smiled faintly. She won't read it. Not until it's far too late. He exhaled through his nose, almost a sigh. You've always had a gift for precision. Precision is all I have left, she said. Grief burns away the rest. Dean set the pen down gently. You'll want copies. One for Lois, one for Claire's trustee. I'll handle the filings before noon. Evelyn rose, smoothing the silk of her coat. Outside the window, the river glimmered in thin sunlight, tugging at the fog. She looked at it as though it were a clock ticking toward reckoning. As she reached for her gloves, Dean added quietly, Mrs. Hartman, revenge disguised as estate planning is elegant, but dangerous. Evelyn turned, pearls catching the light like small moons. It's not revenge, Mr. Palmer, she said, voice calm as scripture. It's balance. When she stepped out into the hall, Lois was waiting by the elevator, arms crossed, expression knowing. So? It's done, Evelyn said. Permanently? Evelyn pressed the elevator button. The mirrored doors reflected her face, calm, faintly luminous, unbothered. The ink's still drying, she murmured, but the damage is permanent. The elevator dinged open, swallowing her reflection in polished silver. As the doors slid shut, Lois caught one last glimpse of Evelyn's eyes, steady, glittering, merciless. The invitation arrived on cream stationery thick enough to muffle guilt. In loving memory of Charles Hartman, it read, embossed in gold script, an evening of remembrance and elegance. Evelyn read it once, then set it aside. She could smell Melissa's perfume on the envelope, something expensive, synthetic, and hollow. That evening, Savannah's twilight was painted in lavender and smoke as limousines pulled up to the courtyard of the Whitmore Inn, a restored 19th-century mansion that once hosted governors and debutantes. Melissa had chosen it for its chandeliers and Instagrammable balconies, not for sentiment. Inside, music pulsed low and tasteful. Crystal glasses chimed. Waiters in black vests floated through clusters of guests, serving oysters and champagne as if grief came with a wine pairing. Evelyn was not there. At home, she sat in her study, the house quieter than it had been in decades. The scent of magnolia oil drifted from the candles burning on the mantel. A photograph of Charles, handsome in his navy uniform, watched her from the corner table. Her phone lit up. A message from Claire. Claire, you were right not to come. A few seconds later, another message followed, with 3 photos. The first showed Melissa standing under a gold chandelier, champagne flute raised high, her black gown slit to the thigh. The second caught her mid-laugh, surrounded by friends who weren't family, every one of them glittering. The third, an artful shot of the dessert table, captured the caption already climbing social media. Grief, but make it couture, Shah Hartman Legacy Dinner. Evelyn's jaw tensed. She enlarged the photo until the reflection in the dessert mirror revealed something small and satisfying, the empty chair labeled Evelyn Hartman. She closed her phone and let the silence return. Across town, laughter echoed through the Whitmore's ballroom, where Melissa's voice carried above the crowd. Daddy would have wanted something beautiful, she declared to a ring of admiring guests. He loved a good party. Ryan nodded weakly beside her, eyes already glossed with the kind of regret that doesn't dare speak. Claire stood near the balcony doors, half in shadow. The laughter made her skin prickle. No one mentioned her grandfather's name beyond hashtags and champagne toasts. She snapped another picture, Melissa posing beside the dessert table shaped like an urn, and slid her phone back into her purse with a hard swallow. Evelyn, meanwhile, moved through her quiet house like someone tracing the edges of absence. She stopped at Charles's armchair and rested her fingers against its worn leather. Then, with deliberate calm, she opened her checkbook. She wrote in clean cursive, Savannah Hospice Foundation, $18,274. The same amount Melissa had spent on the dinner. On the memo line, she wrote simply, in memory of Charles Hartman. For dignity, where it's needed most. She placed the check in an envelope, sealed it, and rang the bell for her housekeeper. Marta, have this sent first thing tomorrow morning. Yes, ma'am, Marta said softly. When the house was quiet again, Evelyn walked to the parlor window. The city lights shimmered over the river, gold and distant. Somewhere downtown, laughter swelled. She imagined the clinking glasses, the rehearsed tears, the air thick with self-congratulation. Then she smiled. Small, measured, private. Later that night, when the guests at the Whitmore began to drift home, the inn staff moved silently through the wreckage, half-empty glasses, wilting roses, and napkins embroidered with the Hartman Memorial Dinner. The next morning, the janitorial crew arrived to find a bouquet waiting on the service counter. 12 white lilies, tied with a gold ribbon. The card read, "To those who clean what others leave behind. With gratitude, Evelyn Hartman." Melissa saw the flowers later when her driver pulled up to retrieve her lost clutch. "Who sent those?" she asked the concierge. "Mrs. Hartman?" "Ma'am." Melissa's expression flickered, something between confusion and irritation. "Of course she did," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. Back at home, Evelyn poured herself a glass of white wine and took it to the veranda. She didn't toast, she didn't pray, she simply listened. To the rustle of oak leaves, to the distant hum of traffic, to the faint echo of her late husband's laughter in memory. The night was still, but she felt something shifting beneath it, a quiet current beginning to pull. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Claire. "Claire. She's posting again. It's all about legacy." Evelyn typed slowly. "Don't correct her. Let her build her throne on air." Then she added a second line, one Claire would puzzle over but remember. "Tomorrow, we start building something real." She set the phone face down. The pearls at her throat cool against her skin. The morning light in Savannah was bright but cold, the kind that made even magnolia leaves look brittle. Evelyn Hartman stood before her mirror, fastening the clasp on the gown she had chosen with surgical precision. Gold satin, perfectly cut, liquid in motion. It caught the light like sunrise, unapologetic and regal. This was no coincidence. Her pearls rested inside their velvet box, untouched. Today was not for pearls. Today was for armor. At her vanity, a jeweler's box lay open. Inside, Charles's old cufflinks, once simple gold and onyx, had been melted and recast into a brooch, its new form gleaming in the shape of a small compass. Evelyn pinned it to her shoulder, the metal cool against her skin. When Lois arrived, she let out a slow whistle. "You're glowing, Evie. Planning to blind them into silence?" Evelyn smiled faintly at her reflection. "No, I'm just undressing for their comfort." By 10:30, the city's courthouse loomed ahead, an elegant building of white columns and cracked marble, its halls lined with portraits of men who never smiled. Evelyn stepped out of the car to a whisper of camera shutters. Local journalists had caught wind of the Hartman will reading. Savannah society had always treated inheritance like sport. Inside, the air smelled of paper, polish, and nerves. Claire was waiting with Dean Palmer near the probate room door, her hands folded neatly over her lap. The girl's eyes widened as Evelyn entered. "Grandma," she breathed, voice barely above a whisper. You look prepared, Evelyn finished gently. A few moments later, the click of heels echoed down the hall. Melissa, draped in black lace and overconfidence. Ryan trailed behind, tugging at his tie as though the air were too tight. Melissa stopped short when she saw Evelyn. Someone's overdressed, she said, the words sweetly venomous, loud enough for the room to hear. Evelyn turned, her smile poised like a blade. No, darling, I'm appropriately armed. The silence that followed had a weight to it. Even Dean's usually impassive face flickered with faint amusement. His gaze lingered on the brooch at Evelyn's shoulder. Interesting piece, he murmured. That wasn't in your usual collection. It wasn't, she said. It was remade. From Charles's cufflinks. Dean nodded once. Respectful, understanding. Melissa blinked, clearly missing the symbolism. They entered the reading room. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, turning dust into gold. On the mahogany table sat a stack of envelopes, the Hartman seal pressed in red wax. Evelyn took her seat at the head, Lois at her right, Claire beside her. Melissa and Ryan sat opposite, husband and wife framed like defendants awaiting sentencing. Dean cleared his throat, glancing at Evelyn for permission. She gave a small nod. Before he could begin, Melissa leaned forward. I assume this won't take long, she said. Ryan and I have an appointment afterward. Lois arched an eyebrow. Oh, I wouldn't rush, sugar. You'll want to hear every word. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap, eyes serene, but her pulse thrummed like the hush before thunder. Dean opened the first envelope. Last will and testament of Charles Bennett Hartman, he began, voice measured, professional. Filed and executed per Georgia state law, revised by the surviving spouse after his passing. Melissa's painted smile faltered. Revised? Dean's gaze didn't lift from the page. Yes, at Mrs. Hartman's discretion. Evelyn watched her daughter-in-law shift in her chair, the lace at her neckline suddenly less regal, more constricting. The hum of the courthouse clock filled the silence. Claire stole a glance at her grandmother, the gold catching sunlight like defiance itself, and realized this was no ordinary meeting. This was theater, trial, and victory, wrapped in one. When Dean began reading the preamble, Evelyn's attention drifted briefly to the reflection in the courthouse window. Her own silhouette stared back at her, upright, unyielding, untouchable. Melissa whispered to Ryan, "She's enjoying this." Evelyn didn't turn, didn't speak, but her lips curved slightly. She wanted Melissa to see that smile, to understand that revenge didn't need noise, only timing. Lois leaned closer and murmured under her breath, "They thought this was their coronation." Evelyn's eyes stayed forward. "Let them wear their crowns for now," she said softly. "Gold looks best against ashes." Outside, the courthouse bell rang once, a sharp, metallic chime that made Claire flinch. Inside, Dean reached the line that would change everything. Evelyn sat straighter, her brooch glinting like a warning flare. The courthouse clock struck 11, the sound deep and ceremonial, as if the walls themselves wanted to bear witness. The air in the probate room had grown heavy, layered with perfume, tension, and the faint scent of polished wood warming under sunlight. Dean Palmer adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable as he lifted the will from its envelope. "This is the last and final testament of Charles Bennett Hartman," he began, his voice steady as granite. "Revised and executed under Georgia law, witnessed and notarized as of," he glanced down, "January 18th. Melissa frowned. "That's after the funeral." Dean didn't look up. "Correct." Evelyn's gold satin caught the light like a living flame. She didn't move, didn't blink. Only her eyes, cool, precise, watched the performance unfold. Dean continued. To my granddaughter, Claire Hartman, I leave the property located at 419 Whitaker Street, known as the Hartman Cottage, including all its furnishings, heirloom items, and associated land. Additionally, a scholarship trust shall be established in her name to support students pursuing architecture and design. Claire's breath caught. He really left me the cottage? She whispered, almost afraid to believe it. Evelyn turned slightly toward her, the faintest warmth softening her otherwise composed face. He did, she said, and so did I. Across the table, Melissa blinked hard, her painted lips parting. Wait, what? Dean shuffled to the next page. To my son, Ryan Hartman, I leave the 1966 Mustang GT, currently stored at the Whitaker Street garage, and its full restoration fund. No additional real property transfers are designated to him. Ryan's brow furrowed. Just the car? Dean nodded once. And the fund. It was your father's favorite, I believe. Melissa straightened in her chair, chin tilting upward as if reclaiming composure through posture alone. And my portion? She asked, a brittle edge creeping into her tone. Dean turned another page. His voice didn't change. That was the cruelest part. It was simply business to him. Lines, clauses, ink. He read aloud. Melissa Ann Hartman shall receive no part of this estate, tangible or liquid. She is to be removed from all beneficiary listings, trusts, and future amendments pertaining to the Hartman holdings. The sentence hung in the air, a clean cut no one had expected to hear spoken aloud. Melissa froze, blinking as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder. What? Dean went on, each syllable steady and final. This clause was added at the sole discretion of the surviving spouse and legally notarized the week following Mr. Hartman's service. What? Melissa said again, louder this time, her voice fractured against the courtroom's polished walls. That's not legal. It can't be. You can't just... Dean placed the document on the table and leaned back in his chair, his tone unbothered. Mrs. Hartman, your name was lawfully stricken from the estate in full compliance with Georgia statute. The paperwork was reviewed and filed by my office personally. It's airtight. Melissa looked to Ryan, her voice sharp with disbelief. Say something, this is insane. Ryan's face had gone pale. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding his mother's gaze and his wife's pleading eyes. Melissa, just stop. Stop, she snapped. Your mother... Evelyn finally looked at her, every inch of gold in that room belonging only to her. My name is Evelyn, she said quietly, and you were warned, though not in words you cared to hear. Melissa's breath stuttered. You can't just erase me? Oh, but I can, Evelyn replied. And I did. A sharp rustle broke the silence. Lois Carpenter, who had remained silent until now, reached into her structured handbag and withdrew a folder. Thin, crisp, official. She slid it across the table toward Melissa. Time-stamped, Lois said, her tone dry as dust. Week after the funeral. Witnessed, notarized, sealed. I made sure of it myself. Melissa stared down at the folder as though it might explode. The notary's seal glinted faintly under the fluorescent light, mocking her. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the tick of the courthouse clock and the faint buzz of an overhead light. Then Melissa pushed back from her chair so abruptly that it screeched across the floor. This isn't over, she hissed. You'll regret this, Evelyn. I'll make sure of it. Evelyn didn't rise. You've already made sure of enough. Melissa stood trembling, anger, humiliation, disbelief tangling beneath her perfect posture. Her lipstick had smudged, her composure had fled. Claire reached instinctively for her grandmother's hand under the table, fingers small but steady. Evelyn's hand met hers, a quiet alliance sealed without words. Dean cleared his throat once more. That concludes the formal reading. Copies will be filed with the county and mailed to all parties within 48 hours. Lois looked at Melissa with faint pity. Next time, sugar, read the fine print before you smirk. Melissa turned toward the door, her heels clacking like gunfire on marble. Ryan hesitated, torn between habit and shame, then followed her out. Shoulders slumped, tie crooked. When the door shut behind them, the room seemed to breathe again. Evelyn adjusted the brooch on her shoulder, the compass glinting like judgment in gold. That, she said softly, was overdue. Dean nodded. You handled it flawlessly. I've had practice, she said. Through the courthouse window, sunlight spilled in brilliant shards, catching the gold on her gown, the tears in Claire's eyes, the small smile on Lois's face. And far below, on the courthouse steps, Melissa stood frozen in the light, scrolling through her phone, already plotting how to make her fury public. 2 days after the will reading, Savannah hummed under an early spring heat, the kind that made the air ripple above cobblestones and coax the scent of gardenia from the hedges. But at 419 Whitaker Street, that warmth stopped at the gate. Melissa stood on the front steps of the Hartman cottage, one manicured hand gripping the wrought iron railing, the other holding her phone. Behind her, Ryan fumbled with the keys that no longer fit. What do you mean they changed the locks? She demanded, voice pitched high with disbelief. Dean Palmer's sedan pulled up to the curb, his arrival measured, inevitable. He stepped out with a leather portfolio under one arm and a glance sharp enough to cut glass. Good morning, Mrs. Hartman, he said evenly. Or should I say, former resident. Melissa's eyes flared. You can't be serious. This is our house. Ryan grew up here. Dean's expression didn't shift. That's correct. And as of this morning, this property is now held in trust under Miss Claire Hartman's name. Ryan stopped mid-step, the metal key slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the porch. Wait. What? Dean flipped open his folder as if to confirm a weather report. The transfer was completed last night. The deed and title now list the Hartman Scholarship Trust as primary holder, with Claire as its beneficiary. Melissa laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. A 16-year-old owns this house? Oh, please, that's ridiculous. Dean tilted his head slightly. 17, actually. And no, technically, the trust owns it. Miss Hartman simply benefits from the foresight of those who valued responsibility over vanity. Melissa's laugh died mid-breath. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Dean didn't blink. I'm merely informing you. From inside the gate, a smaller voice broke through the tension. Grandma said I could paint the garden walls, Claire said. She stood in the doorway, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, a can of white paint beside her. Evelyn appeared behind her, radiant in her cream day suit, the gold brooch gleaming like sunlight on the water. And you will, she said, her voice carrying easily across the yard. Melissa spun around, fury blooming across her perfect face. You had no right. Evelyn descended the porch steps one at a time, unhurried, elegant as a verdict. Every right, actually. The paperwork you neglected to read made sure of it. Ryan's gaze darted helplessly between them. Mother, maybe we can talk about... No, Evelyn said, her tone silencing him as effectively as a slammed door. There's been enough talking. Melissa stepped closer, her heels sinking slightly into the soft soil. You can't expect us to just... What? Move out? Start over like tenants you've evicted? I expect nothing, Evelyn said coolly. Expectation was the first luxury you abused. Melissa's hands clenched at her sides. I'll contest this. You can't just erase me from... Dean closed the folder with a deliberate snap. You'll lose, he said, his voice mild but final. "And when you do, you'll pay our legal fees." Mrs. Hartman was, how shall I put this, thorough. Melissa's mouth opened, but no sound came. The color drained from her face. Claire, still standing in the doorway, glanced toward her grandmother. "Can I start with the garden wall?" she asked softly. Evelyn's eyes softened. "Just slightly." "Yes, darling. Paint it bright. Let's make it ours again." Claire nodded, dipping the brush into paint. The bristles hit brick with a soft shh, 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 a sound both innocent and defiant. Melissa turned sharply toward Ryan. "Are you just going to stand there?" she hissed. "Do something." Ryan bent down, picked up the fallen key, and looked at it for a long time. At the familiar shape, the dull gleam. Then he pocketed it. "There's nothing to do," he said quietly. For the first time, Evelyn looked at her son, really looked, and saw not defiance but defeat, a kind of tiredness that almost mirrored her own. Melissa's phone buzzed in her hand. She ignored it, eyes still locked on the painted wall, where Claire's brush had started tracing the outline of a white dove. Evelyn turned to Dean. "Please make sure the trust insurance is updated immediately. I don't want any misunderstandings." "Already done," Dean said. "Miss Hartman has full authority to maintain and reside here under trustee supervision." Melissa's voice cracked. "You can't mean she's living here without supervision? Without you," Evelyn said. "Yes." The air seemed to thicken. The world outside the wrought iron fence kept moving. Tourists, cars, the hum of the city. But inside the gate, time held its breath. Melissa's heels scraped against the stone as she turned and stalked toward the curb, her fury a living thing that trailed behind her like smoke. Ryan followed at a slower pace, shoulders heavy. Neither spoke. Lois, who had been leaning against the garden gate the entire time, removed her sunglasses and sighed. "You do have a flair for symmetry, Evie." Evelyn watched the departing figures disappear into the streetlight's glare. "Grief taught me geometry," she said. Claire paused mid-stroke, turning to her grandmother. "What does that mean?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "That everything broken eventually finds its right angle." The paintbrush touched the wall again, slow and steady. From the sidewalk, a flash. Someone had stopped to take a photo. A stranger. A headline-hungry observer. Evelyn didn't flinch. The bell over the door chimed like a whisper of old gold when Evelyn and Claire stepped inside Henderson and March, Savannah's oldest jeweler and dress atelier. The air smelled of cedar, starch, and history. The kind of place where time didn't move so much as glide, polished and deliberate. The owner, Mr. March himself, appeared from behind a velvet curtain, immaculate in his pressed vest and round spectacles. "Mrs. Hartman," he greeted, voice soft with respect. "It's been too long." Evelyn smiled. "That's because grief makes terrible company for mirrors." He inclined his head. "And yet, here you are, radiant." His gaze shifted to Claire. "And this must be the new Hartman generation?" Claire blushed. "I guess so." Lois was already perched on a tufted chair, sipping from a porcelain cup of tea she'd somehow convinced the clerk to bring. "Don't let him intimidate you, sugar," she said to Claire. "He's only dangerous with fabric shears." Evelyn ran a hand along a row of mannequins dressed in tailored jackets and silk skirts. "We're here for a piece of continuity," she said, "something that fits her life, not mine." March's eyes gleamed. "Then we'll make something that carries your shadow, but moves in her light." He snapped his fingers and two seamstresses appeared, guiding Claire toward the fitting mirror. Bolts of ivory, dove gray, and soft gold fabrics fanned out before her. Evelyn chose a white blazer from a rack, structured but elegant, with delicate gold piping along the lapels. She handed it to Claire. "Try this one." Claire hesitated. "It looks too fancy." Evelyn's voice was firm but kind. This is what women wear when they carry names. Claire slipped her arms through the sleeves, the fabric molded to her shoulders as if it had been waiting for her. She turned toward the mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't a child anymore. Lois blinked rapidly, pretending to be annoyed by dust in her eye. Well, if that doesn't look like power dressed for Sunday, I don't know what does. Claire smiled shyly. Grandma, it's perfect. Evelyn studied her granddaughter's reflection. The cut, the confidence, the faint tremor of someone realizing she belonged in her own story. Perfection isn't the goal, Evelyn said. Endurance is. While the seamstresses took notes and pinned the sleeves, Mr. March disappeared into the back room. He returned moments later carrying a small black velvet box. Mrs. Hartman, he said softly, this came from your last visit. The one right after Mr. Hartman's passing. You asked us to reset it. Evelyn took the box and opened it slowly. Inside was a gold locket, small and round, its surface etched with a compass, rows that matched the brooch pinned to her shoulder. Claire leaned closer. It's beautiful. Evelyn unfastened the clasp and held it open. On one side, Charles, smiling in his navy blues. On the other, a younger Evelyn in her wedding veil, eyes bright and unbroken by years. I had them restored, Evelyn said. Your grandfather's photo was fading. Claire's eyes glistened. You're giving it to me? Evelyn nodded. It's time the next heartbeat carried it. When she placed the chain around Claire's neck, the gold caught the light in the same quiet authority as Evelyn's gown had at the will reading. The locket rested against Claire's collarbone, steady, certain. Lois exhaled, a soft sniffle betraying her composure. Well, hell, she muttered. You two just rewrote every Southern fairy tale I've ever heard. Claire turned, a playful grin breaking through the emotion. She's going to hate this, isn't she? Evelyn arched a brow. Which she? You know which one. Evelyn smiled, slow and deliberate. Then it's absolutely perfect. The tailor clapped once. We'll finish the blazer by the end of the week. A suit worthy of the name. Names can be heavy, Evelyn said. That's why we tailor the weight. Claire ran her fingers along the gold trim of the blazer again, her reflection haloed in the mirror's soft light. For the first time, she saw herself as part of something enduring. Not just a granddaughter in mourning, but the inheritor of composure, defiance, and grace forged in quiet steel. Outside, the late afternoon sun had turned the streets of Savannah to molten amber. As they stepped out of the shop, the wind caught the edge of Evelyn's scarf, carrying the faintest scent of her perfume, lilac and resolve. Lois locked arms with her as they walked. You know, Evie, if Melissa sees that girl dressed like you, she might combust. Evelyn didn't look back. Then we'd best give her something worth burning over. Claire laughed, a bright, unexpected sound that turned heads on the street. Evelyn glanced at her, the corners of her mouth lifting. Keep laughing, darling, she said softly. It's the one thing they can't contest in court. The Sunday edition of the Savannah Courier arrived just after dawn, its front page heavy with weekend weddings, charity luncheons, and real estate glamour. But it was page 3, the full-page memorial bordered in gold ink, that stopped the city's coffee spoons mid-stir. A tribute to Charles Bennett Hartman, written by his wife, Evelyn Monroe Hartman. It began without sentimentality. Evelyn's prose was precise, elegant, deliberate. He lived his life believing that dignity was not inherited but demonstrated. He gave quietly, built steadily, and left nothing undone that kindness could have finished. Below, a list, each line another stone in the cathedral of Charles's life. Hospice programs, veteran rehabilitation funds, scholarships for underprivileged students in Savannah's public schools, anonymous donations to children's literacy drives, the historical restoration of the Whitaker Street cottages. Every organization was named, every dollar accounted for. Not a single word mentioned Melissa. By noon, copies of the newspaper were spread across coffee tables from River Street to the historic district. At the cafe on Liberty Square, a pair of socialites murmured over cappuccinos. She left her daughter-in-law out entirely. One whispered, eyes wide. The other shrugged. Considering how she acted at the funeral, I'd say that was restraint. At the Hartman townhouse downtown, Melissa saw the tribute from her phone screen. First as a texted photo from an acquaintance, then a flood of tags on social media. Her hand trembled as she scrolled through the paragraphs. Her name wasn't missing. It had been erased, vacuumed clean from public memory as though she'd never existed in the family at all. Her reflection in the mirror looked wrong, her face too sharp, her eyes too wild. She did this on purpose, she muttered. She published my erasure. Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, tie loosened, expression hollow. It's a tribute, Melissa. For Dad. Maybe it's not about you. She spun toward him, incredulous. Everything she does is about me. That woman doesn't breathe without calculating who'll suffocate beside her. Ryan rubbed his temples. Please. Just don't make this worse. Melissa ignored him, pulling out her phone. She opened her front-facing camera, tilted it for light, and hit record. Hi, everyone, she began, voice tremulous but performative. I wasn't going to say anything, but imagine waking up to find your husband's mother erased you from his obituary. No mention, no acknowledgement. After everything I did for this family. Her tone sharpened. This is what old money does when they feel threatened. They rewrite history and pretend the rest of us never mattered. She ended the video with a shaky sigh and posted it to her social feeds with the caption, "Erased by my own family. Sa, Hartman legacy, Kach, truth hurts." Within minutes, comments flooded in. Girl, maybe don't make grief into content. Didn't you laugh at the widow at her own husband's funeral? She played around and found out. Respect is earned. Melissa refreshed, reading each line like a slap. Her perfect posture wilted. The likes slowed. The hearts turned to eye-roll emojis. Across town, Evelyn sat in her sunroom, sipping tea beside Lois. The newspaper was folded neatly on the table between them. She saw it by now, Lois said, flipping a page idly. Of course she did, Evelyn replied, serene. She's addicted to her own reflection. I just gave her one she can't edit. Lois chuckled low. You really are something, Evie. Even your revenge reads like Sunday literature. Evelyn smiled faintly but didn't gloat. Her eyes lingered on Charles's photograph printed at the top of the page, the one she'd chosen herself. His expression was warm, confident, exactly as she wanted him remembered. He built everything we have, she said softly. The least I can do is build the story right. Her phone buzzed, a notification from Claire. Claire. She's losing it online? Everyone's defending you. Evelyn. That's unfortunate. I wasn't seeking defense. Only truth. Lois leaned over to peek. You gonna respond? Evelyn set the phone face down. No. Let the silence do the talking. That evening, the sunset rolled in amber and pink across the Savannah River. Evelyn opened the back doors to the veranda, letting the breeze lift the lace curtains. For a moment, the house felt peaceful again, its walls no longer echoing with bitterness, just the hum of memory and renewal. Ryan called once that night. The phone rang out on Evelyn's desk unanswered. When it stopped, she looked at it, her reflection caught faintly in the screen's black glass. I raised him better than his choices, she murmured. But even sons have to learn which side of the story they live on. In her suite downtown, Melissa scrolled through the comments on her post until the glow of the phone turned her skin pale blue. She saw one that made her freeze, posted by an account with no profile photo. You laughed at the widow. What did you expect? She threw the phone across the bed and buried her face in her hands. Outside her window, the street lamps flickered to life, one by one, gold halos glowing over a city that no longer belonged to her. The lake house had once been Charles's refuge, his quiet corner of the world, hidden beyond the cypress trees and their mirrored reflections on the dark water. Now, in the heavy air of late afternoon, its stillness had turned into something brittle, like glass about to crack. Melissa stood on the porch with her arms folded tight, the sunlight catching on her gold bracelets as she watched Dean Palmer's sedan crunch up the gravel drive. His presence had become as ominous to her as thunder before a storm. Ryan hovered in the doorway, sleeves rolled, jaw clenched. "Do we really have to do this now?" he muttered. Dean exited the car, adjusting his cuffs, every movement crisp as a closing file. "Yes," he said. "Now." He climbed the porch steps and handed over an envelope, thick with stamped seals. "Per the temporary occupancy agreement signed by both of you, your stay here concluded 30 days after Mr. Hartman's death. That period expired last week. You now have 10 days to vacate the premises." Melissa's hand shook as she tore open the letter, scanning its lines. "You're joking. We paid the utilities. We kept this place running." Dean's expression didn't shift. "Utilities are not ownership. They are usage." Her voice rose. "So, because I didn't pay the mortgage?" Lois, standing by the open screen door, cut in with a single dry sentence. "You paid the light bill, sweetheart. She paid the house." Melissa whipped around, glaring at her. "You enjoy this, don't you?" Lois smiled faintly. "I enjoy closure." Inside, Evelyn moved methodically through the living room, her cream gloves folded neatly over one hand, her eyes scanning the shelves that had once held Charles's books. She didn't look angry, only tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes after cleaning something that's been left too long to rot. Claire knelt near the kitchen island, wrapping porcelain cookware in brown paper. "These are hers, right?" she asked softly. Evelyn glanced over. "Borrowed," she corrected. "Return them to their rightful owner. Me." Melissa followed them inside, voice sharp and breaking. "You're really throwing us out of Dad's house?" Evelyn turned to face her. "No, I'm reclaiming my husband's house. There's a difference." Ryan stepped forward, palms raised. "Mother, please. This isn't helping anyone. Can't we talk?" Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, her composure faltered just enough to show something human. Not forgiveness, but disappointment. "I talked for years, Ryan. You mistook it for silence." Lois set down a box and brushed her hands together. "Well, I'll say this. You two left the place cleaner than I expected. All that performative hospitality must have rubbed off somewhere." Dean moved toward the table and placed another set of documents in front of Melissa. "If you wish to remove personal belongings, do so before the 10th day. After that, the locks will change, and the property transfers to the Hartman Trust permanently." Melissa's hands balled into fists. "You can't humiliate us like this. People will notice." Evelyn stepped closer, her tone calm and final. "They already noticed. You made sure of that." The echo of the newspaper still lingered between them. The obituary, the video, the public unraveling. Evelyn didn't have to mention it. Melissa could feel the weight of it in every pause. Claire set another sealed box near the door. "All done, Grandma." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Good girl." Melissa lunged toward the box. "Don't touch that. That's my cookware set." Lois lifted the lid and checked the bottom of a gold-trimmed pot. "Monogrammed EH," she said, holding it up. "Unless you've started going by Evelyn, I'd say it's not." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, looking ready to fold under the gravity of both women. "Melissa, just let it go." "Let it go," she snapped. "She's rewriting everything. The will, the story, the house. You think it stops here?" Evelyn met her gaze. "No," she said. "I don't." For a moment silence stretched, thick, electric, filled with everything unsaid. Outside, a heron took off from the lake, its wings cutting through the air like the first act of escape. Dean cleared his throat. "That concludes my business for the afternoon." He extended a pen toward Evelyn. "Your final signature, please." Evelyn signed without hesitation, the gold nib scratching across paper. "There," she said quietly. "Done." Melissa looked at the motionless lake through the window, her reflection fractured by the glass. "You think you've won, don't you?" Evelyn turned toward her, her voice almost kind. "Winning is for games. This was about restoration." Lois opened the screen door, sunlight pouring in behind her. "And it's getting late. I'd hate for anyone to overstay their welcome." Melissa stormed past her, heels striking the porch wood like gunfire. Ryan lingered for one last look. Not at his mother, not at his wife, but at the house that had stopped being his the moment he'd chosen silence over loyalty. 10 days, Dean reminded him. Ryan nodded, hollow. "We'll be gone before then." When the car finally pulled away, the gravel settled into quiet dust. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching the ripples stretch across the lake. Claire came to her side, hands flecked with dust and tape residue. "It feels emptier," she said. Evelyn rested a hand on her shoulder. "It's not empty," she murmured. "It's just honest again." The setting sun cast the water in molten gold, and for a fleeting moment, the reflection of the lake house looked whole again, bright, peaceful, unbroken. Then, from across the water, a camera flash flickered once. Rain came quietly that morning, misting the glass panes of the Hartman cottage with silver threads. Evelyn sat by the window, the lake beyond blurred into watercolor. On the table before her lay a small velvet box, old, but newly heavy with meaning. Claire arrived from the garden, hair damp, cheeks pink from the cool air. "You wanted to see me?" Evelyn nodded. "Sit, darling." The girl pulled out a chair, tucking her legs neatly beneath her like someone used to earning permission. Evelyn slid the box across the table. "Open it." Inside gleamed the brooch, gold, refined and luminous. Charles's cufflink had been reshaped into the center, its black onyx now encircled by the diamond from Evelyn's engagement ring. Together, they formed a compass, a symbol Evelyn had chosen deliberately. Claire's lips parted. "Grandma, this is yours." "It was mine." Evelyn's voice was soft but resolute. "Now it's meant to find its next keeper." Claire shook her head. "I don't deserve this." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You earned it the second you didn't laugh." Claire looked down, tracing the edges of the brooch with trembling fingers. "I remember that day. Mom laughed so loud people turned around. You didn't even blink." "Oh, I blinked," Evelyn said, a dry edge curling the corner of her mouth. Just not the way she wanted. Outside, the rain deepened, gentle and rhythmic. Inside, the silence between them filled with something warmer, a quiet understanding that blood didn't make legacy. Character did. Lois entered with 2 cups of tea and paused mid-step. "Well, if that isn't the prettiest bit of revenge wrapped in gold I've ever seen." Evelyn gave her a look, amused. "It's not revenge, Lois. It's preservation." "Uh-huh." Lois set the cups down. "And the Vatican built churches for the acoustics." Claire giggled, her fingers still cradling the brooch. Across town, in the rented condo she hated, Melissa scrolled through real estate listings she couldn't afford and social feeds she couldn't escape. Then a notification flashed. "A Claire Hartman tagged you in a post." Her pulse spiked. She tapped it open. On the screen, a single photo. The brooch, resting against the white lapel of Claire's blazer. Captioned simply, "Legacy can't be stolen, only given." The comments exploded. That's elegance raised right. Her grandmother's class runs deep. This is how you pass on grace. Melissa's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She typed, deleted, retyped. Finally, she settled on a response under the post. Proud of you, sweetheart. That's our family history. Maybe you can share some of the other heirlooms online next? The reply sat there, needy and transparent, until it was buried under a sea of hearts for Claire's caption. Evelyn saw the post later that afternoon, seated by the fire with Lois. She scrolled once, twice, then handed the phone to her friend. She's trying to stay relevant, Lois said, unimpressed, like a moth arguing with a chandelier. Evelyn chuckled, the sound low and dangerous. Let her. Claire entered just then, still wearing the blazer. The brooch caught the firelight, casting small gold prisms across the room. She commented, Claire said cautiously. Evelyn waved a hand. Of course she did. I didn't reply, Claire added quickly. Good, Evelyn said. Never feed hunger that isn't your own. Lois leaned back in her chair. You two sound like a pair of philosophers with impeccable taste. Evelyn turned to her granddaughter. That brooch isn't about fashion, it's a map. You wear it. You remember where you came from, and how not to get lost in other people's noise. Claire nodded, eyes glistening. I'll remember. They sat together in the fading afternoon, fire crackling, rain easing into a soft hush. Outside, Savannah's air grew heavy with dusk. The newspaper that had once carried Evelyn's obituary for Charles lay folded on the hearth, now curling at the edges from heat. Above it, the framed article shimmered faintly. A tribute to dignity. Evelyn glanced at it once more, then at Claire. Let that, she said quietly, be her inheritance. Claire tilted her head. Mom's. Yes, Evelyn said. The lesson that everything she tried to take was never hers to begin with. A distant clap of thunder rolled over the lake. Lois stood, stretching. Well, I'll be damned, Evie. Even your storms sound rehearsed. Evelyn smiled, eyes on the horizon. No, Lois. This one's improvised. She reached for her tea, her reflection faint in the window glass, gold against gray. The courthouse smelled faintly of rain and bureaucracy, waxed floors, old carpet, recycled air. On the third floor, a faded sign read, Civil Division, Small Claims. The irony wasn't lost on Lois Carpenter, who leaned against the wall outside courtroom 3B, sipping from a contraband coffee cup. You'd think someone suing over a family estate would at least have the decency to pick a venue with chandeliers, she muttered. Evelyn gave her a look that was half amusement, half fatigue. She picked it for spectacle, not elegance. When the bailiff opened the door, Melissa swept in like a storm that hadn't learned humility. Dressed in black silk, sunglasses perched high on her head despite the gray weather. Ryan followed a few steps behind, jacket unbuttoned, gaze fixed on the floor. Dean Palmer was already seated at the respondent's table, papers in perfect order, pen aligned to precision. Evelyn joined him, her poise quiet and absolute. She didn't glance toward Melissa. She didn't need to. The judge entered. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense bun. She adjusted her glasses and sighed before speaking. Case 4713, Hartman versus Hartman, concerning alleged financial withholding from estate assets. Melissa stood. Your Honor, she began, voice quivering with practiced fragility. I was wrongfully cut out of the estate of my late father-in-law. My mother-in-law here manipulated documents, moved funds, and... The judge raised a hand. Mrs. Hartman, we're here to discuss your specific claim for damages. Your filing requests reimbursement for $38,000 in personal contributions toward the lake house property. Is that correct? Melissa hesitated. Yes, that's correct. I paid for repairs, Maintenance. Utilities? Dean rose smoothly. Your Honor, if I may. The judge gestured for him to proceed. He opened a folder, one of several in an organized stack, and laid out a series of neatly printed pages. The defendant presents proof that all major property expenses, including taxes, mortgage, and repairs, were paid directly from the Hartman Trust account. What Mrs. Hartman refers to as contributions were, in fact, personal utilities and grocery purchases. He slid forward the receipts, timestamps, and video logs, dated transfers from Evelyn's account, confirmation emails from contractors, security footage from the estate office. Each one punctuated his words with quiet authority. The judge scanned the evidence. Her brow lifted slightly. Everything's documented? Dean nodded. Down to the cent. Melissa's composure began to fray. She's lying, she blurted. You think she didn't plan this? She's been waiting years to humiliate me. The judge's tone cooled several degrees. Mrs. Hartman, emotional speculation isn't evidence. Lois coughed once from the back row, the kind of cough meant to hide a laugh. Melissa turned toward her. You think this is funny? Lois didn't even blink. I think it's over. The judge shuffled the documents again, clearly unimpressed. Mrs. Hartman, the documentation is clear. The funds were not yours, nor were you listed as an executor or beneficiary. The property was legally transferred into a trust prior to your claim. The court finds no basis for damages. Melissa's voice cracked. You're dismissing this? The judge looked up. Yes. In under 5 minutes, in fact. She tapped her pen once against the docket. Case dismissed. You may collect your copies at the clerk's desk. The gavel came down, sharp and final. For a heartbeat, the room hung in silence. Then the scrape of Melissa's chair broke it, a harsh, trembling sound. You'll regret this, she hissed, glaring at Evelyn. You all will. Evelyn stood slowly, collecting her gloves. No, she said quietly. I don't think I will. She turned and walked out, each step deliberate, heels clicking like punctuation marks in a sentence Melissa would never rewrite. Lois followed her, pausing at the doorway to glance back at the scene. Melissa sobbing into her hands, Ryan frozen beside her, the bailiff already calling the next case. Outside, the air was bright, washed clean by the morning's rain. Lois slipped on her sunglasses and exhaled. Well, she said, that was clean, cold, and delicious. Evelyn didn't answer at first. She looked toward the courthouse garden, where a magnolia tree bloomed stubbornly out of season, white petals bright against the wet ground. Justice isn't supposed to be delicious, she said softly. But it is nice when it's properly served. Lois grinned. You do have a flair for the theatrical. Evelyn smiled faintly, eyes on the courthouse steps below. Melissa had stumbled out into the sunlight, mascara streaked, hair clinging to her damp cheeks. Reporters had gathered, scenting scandal. The camera lenses caught every flicker of her humiliation. Dean joined them at the curb. That concludes the last of her filings, he said. She's out of legal ground to stand on. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. She'll find another stage. People like her always do. Lois raised a brow. You sound almost expectant. I'm patient, Evelyn replied. And patience, Lois, is the most exquisite revenge. As she stepped into the waiting car, a new sound pierced the hum of the city. The frantic click of a phone camera. The ballroom of the Savannah Historical Society glowed under chandeliers that looked like captured constellations. Every chair was filled. Every voice murmured expectation. It was the annual spring gala, the first to carry the Hartman Legacy Fund as its headline sponsor. Evelyn sat in the front row, her posture impeccable, her gown a deliberate echo of her will-reading triumph. Gold satin, luminous and defiant. The brooch on her shoulder glimmered softly under the lights, Charles's cufflink at its center catching every camera flash that dared to linger. Beside her, Lois fanned herself lazily with the evening's program. "You've done it again, Evie," she whispered. "Turned philanthropy into theater." Evelyn's lips curved, subtle and knowing. "It's not theater," she murmured. "It's a requiem. With better lighting." At the podium, the evening's host cleared his throat. "Tonight's final presentation will be given by Miss Claire Hartman, co-director of the Hartman Legacy Fund." A hush spread. Claire walked up the stage steps in a crisp white blazer with gold trim, the one Evelyn had chosen for her. The audience stilled, a ripple of curiosity passing through them. She looked young, but her presence was steady, the calm of someone who had already weathered storms. Her voice, when it came, carried through the room like polished glass. "My grandfather believed dignity was not inherited but practiced," she began. "And my grandmother taught me something even harder, that silence can speak louder than any apology." Evelyn's gaze softened. Lois's fan paused mid-air. Claire continued. "When people underestimate you, they talk louder, they take more, they test your limits. And sometimes, the most powerful answer you can give is none at all." A murmur moved through the crowd. Approval. Admiration. Claire smiled. Small, but genuine. The Hartman Legacy Fund isn't just about preserving buildings or giving scholarships. It's about teaching grace where none is shown. It's about learning to build quietly after others destroy loudly. Applause swelled, but she lifted a hand gently. "I learned that from a woman who never needed to raise her voice to win a war." Evelyn exhaled, her eyes glistening for the first time in public. Lois leaned closer. "Well, damn," she whispered. "That girl just baptized half this room." The applause broke fully then, thunderous, sustained, a standing ovation that filled the ballroom with golden light and noise. Evelyn rose slowly, not out of vanity, but reverence. Claire's eyes found hers across the distance, and in that quiet exchange, everything, inheritance, survival, defiance, passed without words. Outside the gala, cameras caught it all. The shot of Evelyn standing in gold silk, hand pressed briefly to her chest as her granddaughter spoke. By midnight, the clip had gone viral across local networks. "Silence is power." Teen heiress honors grandmother's legacy at Savannah Gala. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Melissa saw it first from her hotel room, makeup smudged, phone glowing cold blue against her face. The video autoplayed. Claire's speech, the ovation, the slow zoom on Evelyn's smile. Her jaw clenched. "She's milking this," she hissed. "All of it." Ryan, half asleep beside her, mumbled, "Maybe she's just proud." Melissa glared at him. Of herself, maybe. The clip ended, replaced by Evelyn's first public social post in nearly 3 years. A single photo. Evelyn in the front row, in gold, head tilted, eyes calm. The caption read, "I wore gold because I outlived the gossip." It was simple. It was lethal. It spread faster than Melissa could refresh her feed. Thousands of comments followed. A masterclass in quiet revenge. The epitome of grace. Legends don't explain, they endure. Melissa hurled the phone onto the bed, chest heaving. Outside her window, the city glowed in the same light that once felt like hers. Attention, envy, relevance. But now it belonged entirely to Evelyn and Claire. Back at the gala, the last guests drifted out into the cool night air. Lois linked her arm through Evelyn's as they descended the marble steps. "Your granddaughter just sealed your legend," Lois said. "She's the story now." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Good. That was always the point." They paused at the curb, the reflection of chandeliers trembling in puddles from the afternoon rain. Evelyn looked upward at the bright Savannah sky, then down the street where the gold light met the dark. She'll hate that caption, Lois teased. Evelyn laughed quietly, the sound soft as silk. That's why I wrote it. A flashbulb went off somewhere nearby, a photographer catching one last image of the two women framed in light and shadow. Evelyn didn't look away this time. She turned toward the camera, expression serene, victorious, and, for the briefest moment, infinite. The morning after the gala, Savannah's skyline shimmered with spring light, the kind that made even the oldest buildings look newly painted. But inside Dean Palmer's downtown office, the air was colder, measured, and entirely devoid of celebration. Evelyn Hartman sat across from him, a folder of embossed stationery and legal drafts laid neatly before her. Her gold brooch caught the weak light that filtered through the blinds. Claire sat beside her, hands folded in her lap, poised yet uncertain. Dean glanced between them. "You're certain this is how you want to proceed?" Evelyn's answer came without hesitation. "Certainty is a luxury I've always afforded myself, Mr. Palmer. Let's begin." He nodded, flipping open the documents. "The Foundation Charter is ready for filing. The Charles Bennett Hartman Foundation, for Architectural Preservation and Community Arts. Endowment value, 8 figures." Claire's eyes widened slightly. "That much?" Evelyn looked at her granddaughter, calm but firm. "It was his dream, and now it will be your work." Dean continued, his tone precise. Clause 1. Board of Directors shall consist of 5 members. Yourself as founder and chair, Miss Hartman as co-director, and 3 additional members approved by both. He turned another page. Clause 2. All public credits for event organization or prior fundraising related to the Hartman estate are to be attributed to verified contributors only. Mrs. Melissa Hartman's name is to be omitted retroactively and permanently from all promotional materials, sponsorship archives, and grant documentation. Claire blinked, absorbing the weight of those words. Retroactively? Dean's pen tapped once against the folder. Completely. Every photo, every press release, every plaque bearing her name, legally reissued under amended credits. She will no longer exist in the philanthropic record. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. Good. Let her disappear from what she never built. Dean hesitated. You understand what that means? She'll be permanently barred from serving, even as an honorary member. The clause can't be reversed. That's why I asked for it. Evelyn's voice softened, not with mercy, but conviction. Some things deserve to be. The room fell into silence. Outside, a streetcar rattled past, its bell faint and distant. Life going on, heedless of the quiet reckoning taking place above it. Lois entered a moment later, carrying 2 coffees and a newspaper already creased from reading. "Well, the city's still humming over last night," she said, dropping the paper onto Dean's desk. The headline read, "Hartman Legacy Fund Redefines Southern Philanthropy." Beneath it was a photo, Evelyn in gold, Claire at the podium, applause frozen midair like confetti. Lois caught the edge of the paperwork. "Oh, this looks serious. Are we slaying another dragon this morning?" "Just burying one," Evelyn said, signing her name in flowing, deliberate ink. Dean turned to Claire. "Your signature, please, Miss Hartman. You're officially co-director of the foundation." Claire hesitated. "Grandma, are you sure? I don't even know if I'm ready for—" Evelyn placed a hand over hers, gentle but steady. "No one's ready for legacy, Claire. You grow into it." Claire nodded, pen trembling slightly as she signed beneath Evelyn's elegant script. Dean gathered the pages and stacked them with surgical precision. "That's that," he said. "Once filed, it's irrevocable." Lois leaned back in her chair, smirking. "Irrevocable. Now there's a word you've always loved, Evie." Evelyn smiled faintly. "It's the only word people like Melissa truly understand." Across town, at that very moment, Melissa was mid-interview in a local cafe, her publicist filming for what she called a redemption project. She was recounting her years of dedication to the Hartman family's philanthropy when her phone buzzed with a string of alerts. The cafe's TV mounted in the corner flashed a breaking news banner. Charles Bennett Hartman Foundation announced, Melissa Hartman's contributions removed from public record. Melissa froze mid-sentence, color draining from her face. The reporter, sensing the tension, kept the camera rolling. "What does that mean, Mrs. Hartman?" he asked carefully. Melissa's smile wavered, brittle as glass. It's a misunderstanding." But the screen above her betrayed her denial. Her name struck clean from the Foundation's promotional footage, her image cropped from old event photos. Even the gala archives now credited Evelyn Hartman and granddaughter Claire Hartman as the sole architects of the Hartman legacy. She stood abruptly, chair screeching against the tile. "Turn that off," she snapped. "Now." Back in Dean's office, Evelyn's phone buzzed. A notification. The Foundation's press release had gone live. She set the phone face down on the polished wood and rose from her seat. Dean extended his hand. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hartman. It's done." She shook it once, then looked toward the window where sunlight slanted across her reflection, gold against the muted skyline. "It's not congratulations I'm after," she said. "It's completion." Lois joined her at the glass. "You think she'll ever stop fighting?" Evelyn's eyes followed a bird cutting through the bright sky. "No. But that's the beauty of it, Lois. You can't fight shadows once you've lost your light." Claire stood behind them, the signed document in her hand, the ink still fresh. "Grandma, will she ever forgive you?" Evelyn turned, her smile calm and devastating. "Forgiveness is hers to chase, not mine to offer." Outside, the church bells struck noon, clean, final, resonant. The late afternoon sun laid itself gently over the Hartman cottage, turning the ivy a deep, almost luminous green. The air smelled faintly of paint and honeysuckle, a combination that felt like renewal. Claire stood in the garden with a roller brush in her hand, streaks of pale cream climbing the once-cracked brick wall. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, flecks of paint catching the light like dusted gold. Beside her, Evelyn steadied a small ladder. Sleeves rolled to her elbows, her usual poise softened by the faint smile of someone who'd spent a lifetime holding the world together and finally found a corner she didn't have to defend. "Keep the strokes long," Evelyn said. "Let the color breathe." Claire grinned over her shoulder. "You sound like Grandpa when he talked about his paintings." Evelyn's eyes warmed. "He believed walls should tell stories. We're just rewriting ours." Lois sat nearby in a wicker chair under the magnolia tree, camera in her lap, watching the two women move with an ease that seemed almost choreographed. "Well, look at you two, the heiress and the matriarch, armed with paintbrushes instead of pearls. Charles would have fainted from pride." Evelyn chuckled. "He'd faint from the mess first." From the road beyond the garden, a car slowed. The hum of its engine broke the rhythm of paint strokes. Claire paused, roller midair, as a sleek black sedan came into view. The tinted window rolled down just enough for a pair of dark glasses to catch the sun. Melissa. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. Birds silenced, air thickened. Evelyn turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Melissa didn't roll the window down any further. She didn't wave. She only looked. At the house, at the freshly painted wall, at the faint outlines of laughter that drifted across the garden. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Then, without a word, she pulled away. The car disappeared around the corner, its reflection fading in the glass of the garden windows. Evelyn exhaled, the faintest tremor escaping her chest. "Let her go," she murmured. Claire looked after the car, brow furrowed. Do you think she'll ever? No, Evelyn said quietly, not because she can't, because she won't. They returned to their painting, the sound of the roller against brick like a heartbeat restored. When the last corner of the wall was dry, Evelyn peeled off her gloves and walked toward the house. The late light slanted through the French doors, gilding the hardwood floors with amber. On the coat rack by the stairs hung a familiar garment, her black silk funeral dress. She lifted it down, the fabric whispering memories against her skin. "You're really going to wear that again?" Lois asked, following her inside. Evelyn smiled. "Why not? It survived mockery. It deserves tea." A few minutes later, the kettle sang softly. Evelyn poured the tea into delicate china cups and carried the tray to the garden table. She'd paired the dress with her gold brooch, Charles's cufflink at the center, the diamond catching the last trace of daylight. Claire joined them, barefoot, cheeks flushed from work. She sank into a chair with a sigh. "It finally feels like home," she said. Evelyn looked at her, the steam from the teacups curling between them like ghosts of everything they'd outlived, because no one's pretending anymore. Lois adjusted her camera, standing back to frame the shot. "Hold still," she said softly. Click. The shutter captured it. 3 generations of grace and consequence. Evelyn in her black silk, Claire in white with paint-stained fingers. Lois behind the lens. No crowns, no thrones. Just quiet victory, and the gold light of peace earned the hard way. For a long moment they sat in contented silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the creak of the garden swing. Evelyn reached across the table and rested her hand on Claire's. "You've done beautifully, darling. Everything that mattered, you did right." Claire smiled, but her eyes shimmered. "You did the hard part." Evelyn shook her head. "I just refused to let ugliness win." Lois lowered the camera and blinked back tears she'd never admit to. "I think he'd have loved this view." Evelyn looked toward the lake, where the water caught the golden haze of evening. "He does," she whispered. The sound of wind chimes drifted from the porch, a soft, lilting melody that blended with the hum of twilight. Then, in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the echo of a camera click. Claire turned toward the sound, uneasy. "Grandma, did you hear that?" Evelyn didn't look away from the horizon. "Yes," she said softly. "Let her take her pictures." Her eyes narrowed, calm but sharp. "This time, they'll only prove what she lost." The letter arrived on a Tuesday, unmarked, hand-delivered, folded so neatly it seemed afraid to breathe. Evelyn found it waiting on the porch beside the morning paper, the handwriting unmistakable. Ryan's. She carried it to the parlor, setting her tea aside before breaking the seal. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and regret. "Mother, I've spent too long watching silence do what words never could. You were right about everything, but I didn't say it when it mattered. I let her speak for me, and every time I didn't stop her, I lost a piece of both of us. The house, the name, the legacy. They were never really mine. I only want the chance to see you without the noise between us. If you'll have me, I'll come to dinner. Alone. Your son, Ryan." The ink had bled slightly in one corner, like he'd hesitated just long enough for the truth to soak through. Evelyn read it twice, then folded it once more, pressing the crease flat with her thumb. Lois found her a few minutes later, standing by the window in quiet thought. "From him?" Lois asked. Evelyn nodded. "He's finally learned how to apologize without explaining." Lois arched an eyebrow. "Miracles do happen. What are you going to do?" Evelyn looked out at the garden where Claire was stringing lights along the porch rail. "I'll give him dinner," she said. "And Grace." "Grace?" Lois echoed. "That's generous of you." Evelyn's gaze hardened just a little. Generosity isn't forgiveness. It's control. That evening, she wrote her reply by hand. Black ink on cream stationery, her handwriting as steady as ever. Ryan, you don't get gold, but you get grace. Dinner. Friday at 7. One seat will be waiting. That's enough for now. Mother. She sealed the envelope, then walked it herself to the front gate, leaving it in the mailbox before the night air could change her mind. Friday came cloaked in twilight. The lake shimmered, the garden lights flickering like small, patient stars. Inside the cottage, the table was set for 3, not 4. The fourth plate sat in the cupboard, untouched, as it had since the day of the will reading. Evelyn stood at her vanity, fastening the brooch to her shoulder. But not the gold gown this time. Her black silk dress instead, the same one Melissa had mocked all those months ago. It fit her differently now, not as mourning, but as memory redeemed. In the hallway mirror, she caught her reflection, composed, elegant, and unbent by time. The woman in gold had been a warning. The woman in black was the verdict. Downstairs, Claire adjusted the last of the candles, the flicker of flame catching the brooch at her collar, the compass that had once belonged to Evelyn. You look perfect, Evelyn said softly. Claire smiled. I wanted to wear it tonight. It feels like it belongs here. It does, Evelyn said. So do you. At exactly 7, the sound of tires on gravel broke the evening hush. A car door shut, then footsteps, hesitant, familiar. Ryan appeared in the doorway, thinner than she remembered, shoulders bent under the weight of too many silences. He stopped when he saw her. Mother, he said quietly. Ryan. He looked around, at the table, the soft light, the absence that filled the fourth chair. It's beautiful, he murmured. It's honest, she corrected. Sit down. They ate slowly, conversation careful, like glass being handled after years in storage. Claire asked him about his work. He answered with modest ease. Lois stopped by mid-meal, camera in hand, but sensed the stillness and left without saying more than a wink. After dessert, Evelyn poured him tea from Charles's old silver pot. The clink of china was the only sound between them for a long moment. Ryan cleared his throat. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to see you without her shadow between us. Evelyn regarded him quietly. You've already been forgiven, she said. You just had to step into the light to realize it. He looked down, eyes glassy. And her? There's no seat left for her here, Evelyn said simply. That's her doing, not mine. They sat until the candles burned low, the quiet between them finally companionable. When he rose to leave, Evelyn stood too, steady and regal in her black silk. At the door, he turned back. You still wear it well, he said softly. Evelyn smiled, the faintest glint in her eyes. She laughed at this dress once, she said. Said it was old-fashioned. He gave a weary chuckle. She never understood you. No, Evelyn agreed, but she made sure everyone else finally did. When the door closed behind him, the cottage was filled with that deep, golden silence that only comes after justice and love have made their peace. Claire came from the kitchen, a blanket over her arm. Did it go okay? Evelyn nodded. It went the only way it could. They stepped out onto the porch. The night air smelled of rain and magnolia. Claire leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder, the brooch catching the moonlight. What now? Claire asked. Evelyn's lips curved in the faintest, most dangerous smile. Now we live. A soft wind rustled through the garden, carrying the scent of paint and tea and something gentler than victory. Contentment, perhaps, or closure. Evelyn looked out at the lake, its surface gold-tipped beneath the moon, and let the words fall into the quiet, not as a boast, but as a benediction. My daughter-in-law laughed at my funeral outfit, she said softly, almost to herself. So I wore gold to the reading of the will. The knight didn't answer. It didn't need to. The story had already ended exactly where it should, with Evelyn Hartman standing in the dark, victorious, luminous, and finally free.